Everyone's good at heart, but they can mess up and do bad things. Even when someone hurts you, it's better to forgive them and believe in them than to resent them. Growing up hearing this, Li Hao easily trusted the professor. He never thought things would turn out that way between them. After his mom died, Li Hao had to support the family, and word of this spread around school. When a theft happened at school before, Li Hao became the suspect because he was poor. Whether it was true or not, once you're labeled a thief, no one wants to be your friend. He kept to himself before college. Li Hao talked about all this at the counseling office, then suddenly brought up the professor he met 5 years ago. Back in college, Li Hao was heading to ceramics class. On the way, he ran into an enthusiastic underclassman and chatted for a bit. From this guy, Li Hao learned about a professor that upperclassmen apparently all skip. Everyone in ceramics hated him. Li Hao thought about it. He remembered being hated, isolated, and insulted himself. The underclassman was about to continue, but Li Hao cut him off, saying he didn't want to hear it. He walked toward the professor's studio, looking at the course name and professor's name on the doors. He slowly pushed the door open. A man with a tall, slender build came into view. This was Professor Lai Shuyang, who had a name that sounded like a woman's. The moment he saw the professor, maybe their story was already set in motion. The professor was demonstrating for students up front. The girls below were whispering. They were all saying how handsome the professor was. Some upperclassmen said not to be fooled by his looks, that he was whatever. Overhearing this, Li Hao became even more curious about the professor. His first impression was that the professor suited ceramics well. His eyes were clearly distinctive. Suddenly the professor looked at Li Hao. Their eyes actually met. Meeting for the first time, he felt like only the professor wasn't a stranger here. After class everyone left, but Li Hao was still messing around with ceramics. The professor suddenly appeared behind him, asking why he wasn't going home yet. Startled, he twisted the ceramic piece in his hand. Li Hao told the professor he wanted to stay and keep practicing. He wasn't good with the pottery wheel, so he tried to fix the wobbling ceramic. He turned to ask the professor why he wasn't leaving, but the professor just reached out. He turned Li Hao's head back, telling him to focus. He even worked alongside Li Hao. The professor's hands were so warm and gentle. Step by step, he guided him to make a hole in the center, then pressed down hard. This strange feeling left Li Hao flustered. Gradually, the ceramic in his hands started taking shape. The professor whispered softly in his ear, telling him he could press a little deeper. That was seriously tempting. The professor was teaching him how to use the pottery wheel, and there was this nice smell. He thought the professor was thin, but comparing his hand to his own, he realized that wasn't the case. Surprisingly, he had a nice build. Maybe being so close made him uncomfortable. Li Hao was sensitive enough to blush. He turned to make conversation with the professor, looking at his focused eyes, wondering what he was thinking. Those bright, sparkling eyes were really appealing. Who knows what kind of desire was hidden inside them. The professor patiently guided Li Hao until late. After that, Li Hao grew more and more curious about what kind of person the professor was. The professor made a white glazed altar. Taking an altar with a regular beauty and making it balanced and complete with that glaze, that was his unique charm. Staring at the altar the professor made, he couldn't help but admire it. It even had a kind of imposing presence. From then on, Li Hao often got help from the professor. Thanks to him, his progress showed in his final assignment. The underclassmen also praised him for improving so much in such a short time. Li Hao felt really pleased. The two walked together. The underclassman kept muttering that he made his too big. It blocked his view so he couldn't see the path ahead. Sure enough, he tripped on a stone, taking down Li Hao's piece with him. The underclassman quickly apologized. Looking at the scattered pieces, Li Hao could only say helplessly that it was fine. He wanted to make another one overnight in the potter room. The ceramics TA told him no working at night today. The underclassman decided to just not do it and skip the workshop too. Li Hao wasn't satisfied. He had to at least try. If only someone could lend him a pottery wheel. A door closed. Looking up, it was actually the professor. He was already off work. Seeing his student take the assignment seriously, he had to support him. Li Hao was grateful to the professor. Even the ceramic he was refiring broke by accident. He really wanted to do well. Such a shame. The professor said ceramics always break. Better to experience it early. He said this while helping smooth out the fine lines on the ceramic. Li Hao couldn't help but wonder how the professor made such a large altar. Completely flawless. He couldn't even make a small vessel properly. He also said he really liked the description of the professor's piece. In a perfect world of white light, one can quietly shift between purity and 4 colors. The professor's gaze was meaningful. Watching the student recite the description of his work, the professor found it kind of embarrassing. Seems like there was a deeper meaning. Watching the student talk about his work with such interest, the professor suddenly remembered. Someone once said they were sick of him and his work. Li Hao was still talking. He suddenly turned. The professor was smiling at him. After several hours of work, though he couldn't fire it, at least he remade it. You're going to give me an F, right? The professor didn't say clearly. He noticed the professor's clothes were always clean, and he'd even wear white shirts to work. Really surprising. Meanwhile, he always got the area under his apron all dirty. The professor reached out and wiped the dirt off Li Hao's face, telling him it's good when he's not afraid to get dirty. He used to be like that too. At that moment, he suddenly remembered seeing in the news the professor, who was once around his age. He didn't understand why everyone hated the professor. That was the first time he wanted to become someone like the professor. He thanked the professor and was about to change. The professor casually said, "Go ahead." He also put on his coat, listening to the rustling sound of the student changing behind him. The professor glanced. From the waist to the shoulders to the entire upper body, all in view, Liu Hao was focused on changing. Suddenly the professor said it was late, asking if he wanted to come to his place. Maybe he also noticed the professor kept watching him. About the professor's invitation, Liu Hao just wanted to say, "What? Want to see more?" He quickly said his rental place was just up ahead. He could just walk home. Let's just pretend he didn't hear that. The professor seemed satisfied and smiled. He didn't expect the student to be so honest, revealing he lived alone. There's time ahead. He'd let him go this time. After the ceramics course ended, everyone was discussing grades. Liu Hao looked at his grade. The professor only gave him an A-. Soon after, the professor called him to his office. Opening the door, the professor was dressed formally today. Looked like he was going out. He didn't expect he'd bring him along. He hadn't figured out where they were going yet. But his body honestly followed the professor. Turns out the professor took him to the exhibition he'd always wanted to see. The works here were truly stunning. He couldn't help but check out the artist. His name was QEG. Turns out he graduated from his school. Every time he saw good work, his heart would beat so fast. The professor came over to tell Ji Hao the reason for his high score wasn't just his talent, but also his attitude. Staying behind to practice every time, knowing he couldn't finish, but still persisting to the end. That was a plus. Just the exam alone was more complete than other students' work. He didn't expect the teacher to think so highly of him. Bringing him to this exhibition was also hoping he could become a good artist. But how long would it take to become an artist? He was already struggling just with classes. The professor told Liu Hao he wouldn't let his students have that kind of worry. He'd always help him, even after graduation, until he could stand on his own. He planned to start taking on grad students the year after next, though there was no precedent. Liu Hao wondered, could he become the professor's first student the year after next? Suddenly a bunch of people pushed over this way. He also inadvertently touched the professor's hand. The crowd coming in were mostly couples. Tomorrow was Christmas. The professor's shampoo smelled really nice. He was greedily soaking it in. The professor suddenly turned and asked Liu Hao what he wanted for dinner. Liu Hao jolted, almost caught by the professor. His cheeks flushed. He looked down and said anything's fine. He didn't expect the professor would not only take him to see the but also treat him to dinner. What a nice surprise. The professor asked Liu Hao if he wasn't spending Christmas Eve with someone, but instead with him. Posting grades right before Christmas. He must seem pretty cruel. Liu Hao said no without thinking. Compared to a date, he'd rather be with the professor. Besides, he didn't have a girlfriend anyway. The professor found this unbelievable. He actually laughed. It felt like this professor was really smooth, like he was fishing for information. Liu Hao answered seriously, looking affectionately at the smiling professor. When he smiled, his eyes weren't as distinctive. He looked really young. The professor also noticed the student was looking at him. Liu Hao told the professor when he smiled like that, he looked like a college student. The professor reached out and affectionately stroked the student's head. Liu Hao was a bit lost but didn't refuse. Seeing him so well, behaved and cute, the professor's hand moved down, placing it directly on Liu Hao's thigh. This touch on his skin was as warm as that day. Already shy, Liu Hao panicked a bit now. His body instinctively swallowed. He wondered what the intent was. With his heart pounding, he quickly grabbed the professor's hand off his leg, shyly turning his head toward the window. But his hand couldn't help but linger over the spot the professor just touched. Rain fell outside. The glass clearly reflected him. What was happening to him? He'd never had these thoughts about a man before. Shouldn't be excited inside just because the professor was nice to him. Listening to the professor's heavier breathing beside him, he said it was a bit hot. When he fiddled with his collar, he noticed marks on his neck. What was that? He didn't know if the professor was playing hard to get.